Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. 3 martinis coming up.
Really glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is away. Here in his place today, once again, Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. You heard a lot about his activities in that job yesterday as we were talking about seldom used laws. He is also a contributing editor at National Review Online. He is a Fox News contributor. He's the author of many excellent books. Andy, great to have you back again.
Greg, happy tax day.
It is happy tax day. Happy tax refund day, hopefully. But even that's not really a good thing because you're still losing interest from the government. But they should make tax day the second Tuesday in November. But yep. That would be a much more effective place to have it.
I totally agree.
So today we're going to be talking about a number of different things. We're going to be talking about how, the Greens lied to us again, the environmental left, about, hey, if you do all these environmental retrofits for your home, it's not only good for the planet, it's going to save you a ton of money. No, it's actually not. We'll also take a look at this legal fight brewing over Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Andy's written on that a lot. President of El Salvador, Bukele, where Garcia is currently incarcerated, was in town yesterday, and we got all sorts of reaction coming to that. And, of course, Harvard now suddenly realizing that it doesn't like federal intrusion into how it runs its college, something that conservatives, there aren't that many conservative schools, but there are some, have been complaining about that for a long time. But suddenly when Harvard talks about it, everybody's sympathetic. So, Andy, a lot to get to today.
What's the old metaphor of drinking from an open hydrant? I feel like the days are like that. I used to compare Trump weeks and now prepare to compare Trump days to dog years because I really, and there's no, I used to say, by the time you get to Friday, you're exhausted. And I'm like, no, actually Friday's when stuff starts happening. A lot of these immigration issues have come up on the weekends. In fact, I think, we talked yesterday about the kid from Colombia, Khalil. My recollection is he was like arrested on a Saturday night. So there's no rest for the weary, not for the faint of heart.
Trump works 20, 21 hours a day, so I guess his staff feels like they have to as well. So you never know what's going to happen and when. So we'll get to all of that in just a second. Let's start first, though, by telling you about fast-growing trees because it's not only tax day, it is spring. It is time to plant, and you're not going to find better deals than you will at Fast Growing Trees. Did you know Fast Growing Trees is the biggest online nursery in the United States with thousands of different plants and more than 2 million happy customers? That's because Fast Growing Trees offers a wide selection of plants, easy online ordering, quick delivery, expert support, landscaping advice, and of course their Alive and Thrive guarantee, which makes sure your plants will arrive healthy and ready to thrive, or they'll send you a new one, which will definitely do that. We have definitely benefited from Fast Growing Trees over the years with our big plants that add so much ambiance to the rooms, and they just look great, like the Monstera and the fig tree. We've had the ones that, give us spices, which you can put into your dinner. Mrs. Columbus always does an excellent job at that. This spring, get up to 50% off select plants at fastgrowingtrees.com/martini. Plus, use the code Martini at checkout for an extra 15% off your first purchase. Visit fastgrowingtrees.com/martini and use the code Martini. Now's the perfect time to plant. Offer valid for a limited time. Terms do apply. Fastgrowingtrees.com/martini. All right, Andy, this one's kind of on the delicious side. Harvard is not happy with the Trump administration. The university with the largest endowment, which I think is north of $50 billion, is upset with the administration's directives on clamping down on antisemitism. It says it's committed to doing so, but it doesn't like the federal intrusion or the exact demands that are coming here. Wall Street Journal with this part of the story, Harvard University saying Monday it would resist, of course that's the word, the Trump administration's demands to change its governance structure over campus anti-Semitism concerns, saying the government is overstepping its authority. Hours later, the government announced a $2.26 billion freeze of Harvard's multi-year grants and contracts. So Harvard, with the explanation now, Alan Garber is the president over there, and he says last Friday night, just like Andy said, you never know when it's coming, the administration issued an updated and expanded list of demands, warning that Harvard must comply if we intend to maintain our financial relationship with the federal government. Why does it even have one? It makes clear that the intention is not to work with us to address anti-Semitism in a cooperative and constructive manner. Although some of the demands outlined by the government are aimed at combating anti-Semitism, the majority represent direct government regulation of the intellectual conditions at Harvard. It says the administration's prescription goes beyond the power of the federal government. It violates Harvard's First Amendment rights and exceeds the statutory limits of the government's authority under Title VI. And it threatens our values as a private institution devoted to the pursuit, production, and dissemination of knowledge. Here's my favorite part. No government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. Andy, for decades, the left has had no trouble using government telling public universities, private universities, anyone that takes any scrap of taxpayer dollars what they can do. Now they understand the value of full independence. As a Hillsdale grad, they've never taken a federal dollar, don't even take federal student loan dollars anymore, haven't for decades. And so that independence is precious. All of a sudden, when the government's not on your side, it's kind of annoying. Welcome to the party.
Yeah, welcome to the party. You know, it's hard for me to figure out who to root for, though, in this equation, I got to say, Greg. Look, I think Harvard does a lot of screwball stuff. This whole idea, which Trump, of course, is saber-rattling. So he posted this morning about Harvard's endowment that you just mentioned, north of $50 billion. I don't understand why, if Harvard has an endowment of $50 billion, that's off the table as far as taxes are concerned, when we have every other progressive in America talking about like wealth taxes and every other kind of tax they can come up with. So I think there's a lot to criticize here. I also, as a conservative, I don't like government academic partnerships any more than I like private-public partnerships in general. I think that's a bad road to go down. I'm open-minded about the idea that there are some things that are necessary for public health or national security that can only be done at scale if the government contributes to them. I'm skeptical about that argument, but I'm willing to be proved wrong, because I always think if something is desirable in the public interest, put national security aside, but even for public health purposes, the market will find a way to finance those things. I don't know that there's a good reason why the government has to go into financial partnerships with academic institutions any more than with business institutions. So I think there's a lot to dislike about the way these modern arrangements between the government and academic institutions proceed. On the other hand, I really don't like the Corleone administration. I really don't like the idea of a style of governance where, the Trump administration comes into whether it's a school or a business, these executive orders which trundle out a few times a week. I believe that they're unconstitutional bills of attainder. It's absolutely un-American to come out, for the government to come out, make a bunch of allegations that it hasn't indicted or put in a civil suit where people actually have protections in court to fight against the government, which is what the Constitution directs. We're not supposed to have bills of attainder in this country where the government makes allegations against particular people and imposes sanctions, and nothing's been proved in court. And Trump is using this as a tactic, which, if what he was trying to accomplish was just public-spirited stuff, even putting down DEI, which has a lot of civil rights implications, there might be a case for it. But what we're seeing is again and again and again, these people settle by paying, like the law firms are settling by paying upwards of $100 million in pro bono activity on behalf of causes that Trump approves of. To me, that's a pretty dangerous way for government to conduct itself. And if we like it when a Republican government is in charge, I don't think we're going to like it much when Democrats come back into power. They see that this is the new way of doing things. This is not to say that Democrats didn't do this sort of thing, but it's very brazen the way Trump is doing this. And Democrats will do it in just as brazen a way if that's what the new rules are, except they'll have the media as the wind at their back rather than what it is now in opposition. So I believe the correct way of going about going after Harvard or any of these other schools is that to the extent their policies violate civil rights law, the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division should do pattern or practice investigations against them, just like it does to municipal police departments when Democrats are running the Justice Department. If they're violating the civil rights laws, then absolutely the government should be dealing with that, but deal with it in the normal way, which is the law enforcement way, where you do an investigation. And even if you have to subpoena them for lots of information, that's very uncomfortable to go through, but you have a good faith basis to do it if you think that they're violating the civil rights laws. And then if it turns out you can prove the case, charge them in court and then have the proceeding in court with all of the due process protections that implies. I don't think this is a good way to go about this.
Well, I think ultimately the goal is less government intrusion. Hopefully the goal is that the private institutions, when a Republican does this, will be to recoil and not want that relationship with the government, that this will largely fall apart. That would be my goal, not to have tit for tat, depending on who's in the White House and lurching in different directions every 4 or 8 years, potentially. But to get government out, the less they're intertwined, I think the better for everyone.
I would just add to that, I agree with that entirely. But I would encourage people to think about what the Obama and Biden administrations did with municipalities, particularly police agencies, in just this exact kind of extortionate matter. There's no municipality in America that can go toe for toe with the Justice Department's bottomless budget, which I think is now getting close to, it's almost the size of Harvard's endowment at this point. But what ends up happening is they all settle. What they settle on is what's known as a consent decree. And what the law has held, I think this is unfortunate, is there's a lot of things government can't do to you by regulation and by legislation. But if you sign a contract, they can make you agree to do all kinds of things that they could never pass a law to make you do because you'd have constitutional rights against it. And the law just looks at contracts differently than it looks at other kinds of government regulation, even if you're essentially striking a contract with the government. So what ends up happening in these hardly arm's length transactions is the other side realizes the government can hurt me in a bunch of ways, and therefore I better settle. And in the course of settling, I have to agree to do a bunch of things I would never, ever agree to do, and the government could never, ever make me do, other than the fact that we're going to sign a contract. It's really a bad way to go about things.
Today's podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, your mental health is just as important as your physical health, but some people are reluctant to do it for a variety of reasons, and one of those reasons is cost. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, which obviously adds up fast, but with BetterHelp Online Therapy, you can save on average of up to 50% per session. Plus, with BetterHelp, you pay a flat fee for weekly sessions, which saves you big on cost and on time. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people globally. It's also really convenient, too. You can join a session with the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time. Don't miss that part. You can switch therapists at any time. They ask you a bunch of questions when you first sign up to match you with the right one, but if it's not working out for you, you go back to them and they'll provide another one. So your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Andy, on to our second martini now, and the case that you've written about, I believe, at least 3 times now, and that is of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Depending on which media outlet you're looking at, he's either a Maryland man or an MS-13 gang member. So yesterday, the El Salvador president, Nayib Bukele, was at the White House, and he's relevant to this story, of course, because Mr. Garcia was taken into custody, sent to El Salvador, and he is now in prison down there. The argument against that move, of course, is that he was denied due process, and that the Supreme Court and others, including a federal district court judge, have said that that due process needs to play out. But yesterday at the White House, Bukele says he's not about to release Garcia back to the United States. He said it would be the equivalent of smuggling a terrorist back into the United States. And in the same Oval Office meeting, 3 different Trump administration officials also addressed this issue at the behest of President Trump. First of all, you've got Attorney General Pam Bondi.
First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, 2 courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller was also asked to comment on this, and he says the president's terrorist designation of MS-13 is also a critical factor here.
2 immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So he had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States.
And so he says, as a result of that terrorist designation, he does not have a right to be in the country, Garcia, and therefore the federal district judge who ordered that he stay or return to the United States is moot. The Supreme Court decision was also referenced from last week, which they say was a win. It was actually a venue decision as opposed to due process. In fact, the justices said the due process needed to play out. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying now that Garcia is in El Salvador, it's a foreign policy issue, and foreign policy is entirely in the realm of the president. So, Andy, what do you make of everything we saw yesterday, and where's this case going to go?
Well, they're lying, which is unfortunate, especially Bukele, while Trump is nodding approvingly and these high officials are nodding approvingly, say that I can't smuggle a terrorist into the United States is just absurd. And they know it's absurd. You know, when Bondi says that 2 immigration courts ruled that this guy was a terrorist, what happened in that 2019 proceeding is that the guy sought bail. So it was a bail hearing, not a hearing on whether he was a terrorist or not. The government put up evidence that was not very compelling, but convinced the immigration judge and then the Board of Immigration Appeals to deny the bail application. But that wasn't like we make all kinds of, in the Justice Department, you have all kinds of bail hearings. I could argue at a bail hearing that a guy's a member of the Gambino family, and the judge could say, okay, he doesn't get bail. That doesn't mean I've proved he's a member of the Gambino family. I have to do that in court in a racketeering case where that's what the charge is. So they don't have findings that the guy is a member of MS-13. And by the way, Greg, he might be. I'm not saying is or he isn't. Here's what I do know, though. The story is one that Bondi doesn't want to finish, because what happens at the end of that removal hearing is that because the guy's application for asylum is not timely, the immigration judge can't grant him asylum. But he claims to have fear of persecution in El Salvador. Now, I didn't think his story of fear of persecution was very convincing. I thought it was self-serving and it wasn't supported by corroboration. But the immigration judge found that he had fear of persecution in El Salvador and gave him what's known in immigration law as withholding from removal, which means El Salvador is the one place on the planet where you can't send him. And they sent him there. And it was illegal to send him there. And, you know, look, Steve Miller's a smart guy, but he's not a lawyer, no matter how many times he plays one on television. And he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about here. With respect to the, you know, what Bondi said and Miller repeated about the 2 immigration judges, at the end of that story, not only does he get withholding from removal from the immigration court, the Trump administration, the Trump Justice Department lets him out on bail and gives him permission to work, which is the reason that he's been in Maryland all this time, and is a very peculiar thing to do with an illegal alien if you say he's the head of a terrorist organization. In the meantime, it's been 6 years. They've never charged him with being a member or complicit in any crime connected with MS-13. He apparently doesn't have a criminal record anyplace. Doesn't mean he's not a member of MS-13, but again, they haven't proved it. The judge asked them in the hearing that they had in Maryland last week, what's your evidence? They not only refused to go forward with evidence, they abandoned the claim that he would be a danger to the community if he were brought back to the United States. That was a legal claim they had in their papers at the beginning that they abandoned. Again, very peculiar position to take if you're saying he's a member of MS-13. And the thing I think that is most frustrating about this is they keep talking about the president's control over foreign policy and the inability or the insulation of foreign policy from court intrusion and court interference. It's a bunch of nonsense. It's got nothing to do with what this is actually about. The government of the United States under the Trump administration and the government of El Salvador negotiated a custody cooperation agreement. Now, what the fact that this is foreign policy means is no court could tell them make an agreement, or no court could tell them not to make an agreement. But once they make an agreement, if that starts to affect the rights of people who have claims before the court, like Abrego Garcia has a claim that he's not allowed to be deported to El Salvador, that's a claim he's entitled to litigate in federal court. Doesn't mean he's entitled to win. He's entitled to litigate it. So that's the situation that we're in. They have this agreement. Now, what they don't want to talk about, and the court keeps asking them for it, but they're stonewalling, is what's the terms of the agreement between the United States and El Salvador? Here's why I think they don't want to talk about it. What the Salvadoran government said when this agreement was announced is that the United States paid them $6 million to hold about 300 people for 1 year. And by the end of the year, the United States government will decide what the disposition of these 300 prisoners is. What that means is our government continues to maintain dominion and control over these prisoners. And what El Salvador basically is a bailee. Nobody is asking El Salvador to smuggle anybody into the United States. But this is the same in principle as if the federal government made an agreement with the states, which frequently it does, to house prisoners in state prisons because it's more convenient to get people to court under those circumstances. It's the federal government's, the United States government's obligation to get people who are federal prisoners to their court appearances. That's what this case is about. And they're not talking about what the details of that agreement are, because I think it would show that the government still has complete control over what happens to these prisoners. According to Salvador, nobody wants to talk about this anymore, but they were happy to trumpet the agreement when they first made it. And according to Salvador, the agreement is our government decides what happens to these prisoners. Not El Salvador. They're just holding them for us. Our government.
Andy, real quick follow-up on this. I don't know if it's directly applicable to this case, although Garcia did come into the country illegally. Miller's complaint is that, look, they get in here super easily and it takes decades at best to get rid of them. Is that an accurate assessment, or is there an easier way to deport most of them if they don't have some of the legal issues going on right now, like this case?
It depends on what category it is, how difficult it is to get someone out of here. The thing is, I understand and am sympathetic to Miller's point that if you're going to comply with the due process requirements for all these people, and there's 20 million illegal aliens, then how are you ever going to draw down the illegal alien population? And part of the travesty of this is we have federal law that says if you're an illegal alien and you're arrested, you are mandated to be detained during the course of your immigration proceedings. Well, here's the problem. We got 20 million illegal aliens, Congress has funded 47,600 detention spaces for illegal aliens. If you do the math, it's a pathetic amount of resources for what is one of the major problems in the country. So I get his frustration. It's the reason why during the Biden administration, I said I thought Biden should be impeached over what happened at the border. Not because I was anxious to use the I word in connection with Biden or because it would have political resonance, because I recognize, as everyone should recognize, that if you bring millions of people into the country, given what our resources are and given what the due process requirements are, it's a catastrophe because, exactly as Miller is saying now, you can't get through the process with these people and diminish the illegal population in a meaningful way. However, if you're the president and you are sworn to uphold the Constitution and execute the laws faithfully, the due process laws are laws too. The problem with the Trump administration is it thinks that due process is a suggestion rather than a mandate. So, I could agree with Miller in theory that if it turns out you can show a meaningful connection between Abrego Garcia and MS-13, and the Trump administration has in February designated MS-13 as a foreign terrorist organization, that ought to be a basis to kick him out of the country. But the problem is, if you're the government, you can't say that because my objective is legal, I can skip all the due process part and just cut to the objective. I wasn't, as a prosecutor, able to say, I think these people are bad terrorists. Therefore, let's put them on a plane and get them the hell out of here. We actually had to go into court and prove the case. If I was using the logic these guys use, I'd say, what do you mean due process? These are terrible people. And I'm like, yeah, that's what we do in the system. We take terrible people. We have these constitutional procedures that we have to go through to either convict them or deport them or what have you. But you have to go through them. You can't just say, because the ultimate objective I have is something I am entitled to accomplish under the law, I can cut out all the law part and just cut to the objective, which is what they want to do.
We'll get to more government intrusion into our lives in just a moment. But for the moment, let's talk about Oracle, because there's a growing expense eating into your company profits. It is your cloud computing bill. You may have gotten a pretty good deal to start with, but now the spending on that is sky high and increasing every year. So what if you could cut your cloud bill in half and improve performance at the same time? Well, if you act by May 31st, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure can help you do just that. You can cut your cloud bill in half by moving to OCI. It's an offer for new U.S. customers with minimum commitment ending May 31st. You can do that at oracle.com/martini. So what's the advantage for OCI? Well, it's the next generation cloud designed for every workload where you can run any application, including any AI projects, faster and more securely for less. The savings are real. On average, OCI costs 50% less for compute, 70% less for storage, and 80% less for networking. It also has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds. The offer ends May 31st, only for new U.S. customers with a minimum financial commitment. See if you qualify for half off at oracle.com/martini. That's oracle.com/martini. All right, Andy, some more fun from the government trying to tell us what to do. In this case, the Trump administration is trying to roll stuff back. This came from the Washington Post, but this summary comes from the Free Beacon. Even with generous subsidies, green retrofits such as solar panels and heat pumps take anywhere from 8 to 48 years to pay off for homeowners, according to a new analysis from the Post. Solar panels, for example, one of the most popular retrofits, typically require more than 8 years to offset their upfront cost, despite existing federal and state incentives that cut their price by more than half. Heat pumps, as mentioned, a basic heat pump priced at $12,000 after rebates may only save $252 a year and will not yield financial returns for 48 years. A higher efficiency heat pump can save around $755 annually, but still needs 8 years just to recoup initial cost. This is all part of the Trump administration trying to roll back pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act. The president signed an executive order on Inauguration Day freezing the $8.8 billion in home energy rebates authorized by the act. Oh, by the way, insulation and air sealing upgrades cost around $9,100 after rebates, and that takes nearly 29 years to cover installation fees. So, Andy, we're a week away. Not only is it tax day today, we're a week away from Earth Day. I know you've got always very big plans to celebrate Earth Day.
I do.
But as you look at these promises, the green promises always fall short. Do these things. You'll get huge subsidies, you get discounts, you get tax breaks, and you'll save money in the long run. Well, depending on how you define long run, it could be decades. You'll finally break even on this, and whether it actually does any good for the planet is still anyone's guess.
Yeah, this is like the best example probably in history of what the downsides of industrial policy are, where basically we're abandoning free market principles and just allowing the government to pick winners and losers. Like every now and then you get a one-off, like these the trains to nowhere that you have on the West Coast, that they're finally pulling the plug on those after, goo gobs of money have been spent on them and all they have is pillars with no track attached to them. But this thing is the worst thing ever because they've used COVID and a bunch of other emergency type measures to keep pouring more and more funding into this to the tune of trillions of dollars. And it's all based on virtue signaling. Like, if we do this, this will show how much we care about the environment, how much improvement we want. No thought is given to not only what you just summarized there, which is the, how long it actually takes to pay off the savings that they say that you're going to get, but also the unintended counter-environmental consequences of these measures. Like we find out suddenly that these electric cars turn out to be heavier than the cars we've been familiar with all these years, and they may do more damage to the road. And the batteries are something of a environmental catastrophe in terms of disposing of them. The same thing with solar panels. No thought is given to the downstream consequences of this, including some obvious ones that are hard to call unintended, because if you actually had market pressures rather than government deciding who the winners and losers were, you would actually have to think these things through, because you'd lose a lot of money if your experiment had these significant downsides. It kind of ends us where we started, Greg, in the sense that I made a point of, on these public-private partnerships, putting aside national security, because having worked in national security, it is one of these things where you probably have to have some measure of industrial policy, because you can't reveal all the things that would be of importance to the market in order to make intelligent decisions about it. But barring that, the best way in the world to deal with climate change, just like the best way in the world to deal with almost everything we have, is the free market and human ingenuity. And that's the one thing that government can't tolerate.
Bad enough that they cost way more. It's bad enough that they might not even be all that effective. But the government, again, picking winners and losers and essentially mandating this stuff is just absolutely maddening, and goes back to one of the very basic conservative principles: just leave us alone.
Yep.
And
Amen.
let the market work, like you said. So
happy tax day. Leave us alone.
Oh, man. Oh, so true. Andy, great to be with you today. We'll do it again tomorrow. See you then.
Thank you, Greg.
Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, contributing editor for National Review Online. He is also a Fox News contributor and the author of many excellent books. Check them out, including Ball of Collusion. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends to join us as well. We'd love to have them. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. A big help to us. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us all on X. Andy is at Andrew C. McCarthy. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Tuesday. Join us again Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.